Welcome to Sleep Crime Stories. I know you're here to fall asleep. But before we begin, where are you watching from, and what time is it? Also, do you like the anime-style visuals, or should I go more serious? Let's begin. I've been through some bizarre situations on this job, but nothing compares to what happened back in 2006 in Fairhaven, New Hampshire. I'm Davis Crowley, and yeah, I've got one of those last names that sounds like a bad omen, which doesn't help when you're patrolling the kind of places that make grown men nervous for no good reason. My shift had started as usual. Small town, small crimes, a lot of cats stuck in trees and the occasional stolen bike. If I'm honest, I liked the predictability. The quiet stretches between actual calls were nice. I used to joke that the worst thing I'd ever dealt with was Mrs. Hendricks yelling at me because her neighbor's chickens got into her garden. Well, that was before things got real. I mean, real enough that I wondered why I ever took this gig. Fairhaven wasn't the kind of town that got much attention, and I was just fine with that. If you weren't local, you'd probably drive straight through without noticing it existed. We've got 2 bars, a diner, and a gas station that doubles as a grocery store. You see the same faces everywhere. Small towns, right? You'd think nothing could really surprise you after living here for most of your life, but that assumption's what almost got me killed. I was parked near the old quarry, sipping coffee that tasted more like burnt toast, when the call came through. Dispatch said there was something wrong at the Whitlock farm, and not just the regular sort of wrong. Old man Whitlock wasn't answering his phone, and there'd been some reports from nearby houses of strange noises coming from his property. Normally, that wouldn't be my problem. Whitlock's place was out near the edge of town, where the woods start getting thick, and people like their privacy. But when nobody could get hold of him for 3 days, the mayor got spooked. So it became my problem. I wasn't armed that night. Not that I usually needed to be. Fairhaven wasn't the type of place where you expected trouble. No, I wasn't the kind of cop who went around thinking I'd end up in some kind of life or death scenario. If I'd known what was waiting for me out there, I would have taken the shotgun from the back of my cruiser. Hell, I'd have brought the whole damn station with me. I drove out there in the evening, just as the sky was dimming, casting the farmland in long stretches of shadow. Whitlock's farm was about 20 minutes from the town center, but it felt like a world away. The closer I got, the fewer streetlights I saw. Eventually, I was just driving through complete darkness, my headlights cutting through the gloom. When I pulled up to the gate, the place was dead silent. No lights, no sounds. Just that eerie kind of quiet you only get when something isn't right. Whitlock kept animals, cows, chickens, a couple of pigs. But I didn't hear any of them. Not a single cluck or moo. And that's when I felt it. That gnawing feeling in your gut that tells you something is off, like a sixth sense that's kicking in before your brain can catch up. I cut the engine and grabbed my flashlight, stepping out into the stillness. The smell hit me before anything else. It wasn't just manure or wet hay. It was thick, metallic, like copper on the air, which meant blood. A lot of it. I called out, "Whitlock, you home?" No response, of course. And if there was, I think I'd have been more scared than I already was. I unlatched the gate and started towards the barn. The closer I got, the stronger the smell. It was hard to breathe without gagging, but I kept walking, my boots crunching on the gravel. The barn door was open, swinging gently in the breeze. I don't know why I felt the need to announce myself again, but I did. "Fairhaven PD, Mr. Whitlock, you in there?" I stepped into the barn, sweeping my flashlight around. At first, everything looked normal, just rows of hay bales and the usual farm tools scattered about. But then, I saw it. Near the back, something dark and slumped in the corner. I approached, the smell of blood getting stronger, and that's when my flashlight caught the body, or what was left of it. It took me a second to even register that it was human. Whitlock had been torn apart, his limbs twisted at unnatural angles, half his face missing. There was no way an animal had done this. No way in hell, The blood pooled beneath him was still wet, which meant whatever or whoever had done this was recent. Real recent. I don't know why I didn't run then. Maybe because my brain hadn't caught up to the danger, but I stood there like an idiot, just staring, until I heard it. A low, wheezing breath coming from deeper in the barn. Now, let me tell you something. You never want to be alone in a dark barn, standing next to a fresh corpse, and hear something breathing. That's the kind of situation that makes you reevaluate your life choices real fast. My legs didn't want to move, but somehow I forced myself to walk toward the sound, every instinct screaming at me to stop, but I couldn't. Not until I saw what was making that noise. I rounded the last row of hay bales, and there it was. At first, I thought it was a bear, big, hunched over, covered in matted fur. But then it turned, and I realized how wrong I was. It had the body of a bear, sure, but its face was all wrong. The snout was too short, almost human, with flat teeth smeared with blood. Its limbs were long, twisted with claws that looked like they belonged to something much bigger. And its breath, hot, foul, and labored, poured from a mouth that seemed too wide, stretching open as if it was smiling. I froze. My flashlight beam wobbled as my hands shook, the creature's yellowed teeth glinting in the weak light. I've never felt fear like that in my life, not even when I was a kid and nearly drowned in the lake. This was different. This was primal. My body knew before my mind did. I was going to die. It growled, not a sound, but more like a rattling deep in its chest, and then it lunged. I barely dodged, stumbling backward into the hay bales. My flashlight clattered to the ground, spinning in the dirt, throwing the light into crazy patterns across the walls. For a second, I saw its full form in the chaos, its torso stretched like it had been pulled apart, bones poking through its fur like they didn't fit right. This thing wasn't natural. I scrambled to my feet and ran as fast as I could out of that barn, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I dove into the driver's seat, hands fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life and I peeled out of there, gravel kicking up behind me. But the thing didn't chase me. It just stood there, watching from the barn door as I sped away. That's the worst part. It could have caught me if it wanted to, but it didn't. It let me go. I radioed for backup once I was back on the main road, but by the time anyone else got out there, the thing was gone. Whitlock was still dead, though, ripped apart like some macabre puzzle. His animals? All dead, too. Torn up, just like him. The farm looked like something out of a horror movie, but this was real. This happened, and I still don't know what that thing was. Neither did the guys from the station later to investigate. They said it was some kind of animal attack, but I know better. There was no animal in those woods. At least, not one I've ever heard of. They found tracks, though. Big ones. Bigger than any bear could make, with claw marks that cut deep into the earth. They never did figure out what killed Whitlock. The case went cold, like so many others in these small towns. People forget. They move on. I didn't, though. How could I? I haven't been back to that farm since. Don't plan on it. Every now and then, I hear stories about something strange in those woods, but nothing ever sticks. People disappear, animals turn up dead, and everyone just shrugs it off. But me, I know what's out there. If you ever find yourself near Fairhaven, do yourself a favor. Stay away from the Whitlock place. Trust me, you don't want to know what's still lurking in those woods. I knew the day was going to be rough when the donut shop ran out of glazed. That's the kind of omen that makes you wonder if you should just call it quits early. But no, I still had a job to do. Been doing it for 12 years here in Craven Springs, West Virginia. Name's Billy Garber, small-town cop, born and raised right here in the same place. Craven ain't big, but it's home. You know the type. A few thousand people, everyone's in your business. And if you don't wave to Mrs. Hill at the corner store, you'll hear about it from your mama the next day. Yeah, We get bored. Not a lot happens here, except the occasional drunk out at the mine or some idiot getting into a bar fight at Rosie's. But things have been quiet this month. Too quiet, if you ask me. Which is why when the call came in about something going down in the woods off Pike Hollow Road, I didn't think twice. Probably some kids messing around again, getting themselves into trouble. Last time it was a bunch of teenagers trying to start a campfire during a burn ban. Figured this was the same kind of deal. It was late afternoon by the time I made it out there. The sky a dull gray, like it couldn't decide whether to rain or just stay miserable. Pike Hollow Road wasn't more than a dirt path that cut into the woods, the kind of place you only go if you're hunting or hiding from something. Dispatch hadn't said much, just that there were strange noises, which usually translated to someone saw a raccoon and freaked out. I parked my cruiser at the trailhead, stepped out, and gave a quick look around. The woods were dense here, thick with pine and brush that didn't see much sun. Quiet, too, in a way that didn't sit right. Even the birds were holding their breath. "All right, let's see what you kids are up to," I muttered, grabbing my flashlight and heading into the woods. It didn't take long to realize this wasn't some teenagers playing a prank. There was something off, and not just the quiet. About 100 yards in, I found a boot. Not like a kid's sneaker, a real hiking boot, heavy duty, meant for rough terrain. "Great, lost hiker," I said, shaking my head. But when I picked it up, it was still warm. I kept walking, now more alert. The kind of alert that tells you something's out of place, but you can't quite put your finger on it. A few minutes later, I spotted something else, a smear of something dark on the trunk of a tree. Blood. Suddenly, the woods didn't feel so peaceful anymore. I wasn't armed. Yeah, I know, a cop without a gun. But the truth is, here in Craven Springs, you don't usually need one. Last time I used it was to scare off a coyote messing with some cattle. My service pistol was locked up back at the station, along with my bulletproof vest. Didn't think I'd need them for a simple call about noises in the woods. Big mistake. The deeper I went, the worse it got. I found more blood. Not splatters, but streaks, like someone had been dragged. The trail led further into the woods, where the trees got thicker, the light barely making it through the canopy. That's when I heard it. A sound that wasn't quite human, wasn't quite animal. A low, gurgling grunt, like something was choking on its own breath. "All right, Billy," I said to myself, my voice shaking. "Just figure out what it is, call it in, and get out. No need to be a hero." I pushed through the underbrush, my flashlight flickering in and out, casting weird shadows that made the trees look like they were closing in on me. Then, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. At first, I thought it was just a large deer or maybe a bear. But no, this thing was wrong. It had the size of a grizzly, but its limbs were too long, too gangly, like a spider with skin stretched tight over bones. The head was misshapen, like someone had taken a wolf and smashed its face in. But the worst part was its mouth, a gaping hole lined with sharp teeth. Not natural, not in any way I'd ever seen before. And it was dragging something. Someone. A body. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. Not with this thing standing there, gnawing at the mangled body like it was nothing more than a chew toy. It hadn't seen me yet. Thank God. I slowly backed up, hoping the crunch of dead leaves underfoot wouldn't give me away. That's when it looked up. For a split second we locked. I don't want to say eyes because I never saw them. Whatever it had, it knew I was there, and it didn't like being watched. I turned and ran. I could hear it crashing through the woods behind me, its heavy footfalls shaking the ground. My heart was pounding in my ears, my legs burning as I pushed myself faster than I ever thought possible. But I knew I wasn't going to make it. This thing was faster, stronger, and hungry. There was a split-second decision. I couldn't outrun it, but maybe I could outsmart it. I veered off the trail, diving into a patch of thick brush. I crouched down, holding my breath, hoping the darkness and the dense foliage would hide me. The noise stopped. I sat there in the silence, my chest heaving. I could feel the adrenaline surging through my veins, the sweat dripping down my face. For a moment I thought I'd lost it. Then I heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps. It was searching for me, hunting me. I had to get back to the cruiser, back to the safety of something metal and solid. The radio. I could call for backup. I just needed to move without it hearing me. As I crawled through the underbrush, the sound of its footsteps grew distant. Maybe it was giving up, or maybe it had found another victim. Either way, I didn't care. All that mattered was getting out alive. After what felt like an eternity, I finally made it back to the trail, but the cruiser was still a ways off. I was about to make a break for it when I heard a scream. Not human, but not animal either, like something in pain. Against every instinct I had, I stopped. I looked back. What the hell was I thinking? Just run. But something made me freeze again. Maybe it was the fact that if I ran, I'd just lead it back to the town and someone else would get killed. Maybe it was the fact that I'm a cop and it's my job to protect people. I don't know. But I turned back. When I found it, the thing was standing over a body, thrashing like it was wounded, its chest heaving with each breath. There was another man, not dead, but barely clinging to life, sprawled out at the creature's feet. He had a hunting rifle slung across his back, and I realized in a flash what must have happened. He'd shot it. He'd actually wounded the thing. I didn't think. I just acted. Rushing toward the man, I grabbed the rifle off him, and without even aiming, I fired a shot straight into the creature's chest. It screamed. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard, a high-pitched wail mixed with the gurgling of blood. It stumbled backward, falling to the ground in a heap of limbs and fur. It wasn't dead, but it wasn't going to be getting up any time soon. I dropped the rifle, shaking, and bent down to check on the man. He was barely conscious, bleeding from several deep gashes across his torso. "You all right?" Though it was obvious he wasn't. He coughed, blood dribbling down his chin. "That thing," was all he managed before his eyes rolled back in his head. I looked at the creature, still twitching on the ground, its breath shallow. Whatever it was dying, and I was glad for it. We never did find out what that thing was. The doctors patched the guy up, but he didn't make it through the night. Didn't matter though. His story died with him. And the thing? Well, let's just say it didn't vanish. But it didn't stick around for long either. They carted it off to some lab upstate for testing, whatever that means. But I'm still here, back in Craven Springs, doing my job. Small town life doesn't change, not really. People still wave when they pass by. Mrs. Hill still gossips at the corner store, and kids still find stupid ways to get themselves into trouble. But me, I don't go near those woods anymore. I leave that to the next guy. Nobody tells you that being a small-town cop is just glorified babysitting, not until you're knee-deep in chasing down some idiot for stealing lawn chairs off his neighbor's porch. My name's Jacob Spivey. I've been patrolling the streets of Silver Grove, Ohio for the better part of 10 years. Not a long time, but long enough to get a feel for the place, know everyone by their first name, and learn which drunk idiots you're going to have to drag out of the bar after a Browns game. It was 1997, a year that stuck with me for a lot of reasons, mostly because it was the year everything went sideways, way sideways. Small towns have their secrets, sure, but nothing like this. So, it all started when the calls came in about a group of kids gone missing. Typical small-town stuff, you'd think. Kids wandering off into the woods to do whatever it is kids do these days. Hell, I remember sneaking into the woods as a kid myself. But this was different. It wasn't just a couple of teenagers disappearing after a Saturday night. We were talking 4 kids, all under the age of 12. They were out for a camping trip with some Boy Scout group, and nobody had seen them since they wandered away from the campfire. Naturally, I got called in, along with my partner, Jared Granger. Granger, bless his soul, was as reliable as a broken flashlight, but he had a good heart, even if it was buried under layers of bad jokes and self-doubt. We headed out to where the kids were last seen, right at the edge of Fox Hollow Woods, a stretch of thick forest that everyone in town avoided, mostly because of the rumors. You've heard of the creepy stories, right? Every town has them. Fox Hollow had its share. The old-timers used to talk about strange animals, twisted things that shouldn't exist, lurking deep in the woods. Kids would swear they saw shadows moving just outside their vision. Me? I figured it was just the usual nonsense. You hear something enough times, and it loses its edge. We spent the better part of the morning trudging through the woods, calling out the kids' names, hoping they'd come running. Nothing. No sign of them. Not even a footprint or a half-eaten sandwich. And then Granger, in his infinite wisdom, decided to crack a joke. "Maybe they got snatched by Bigfoot, Spivey," he said, chuckling to himself. I ignored him. Granger had a habit of cracking jokes when things got tense, but even he started to get quiet when we found the first clue, at least what we thought was a clue. About a mile in, we stumbled across an old, beat-up tent. Looked like it had been there for years. Inside, we found a pile of old bones, picked clean. Not human, thank God, but something about it gave me the creeps. I radioed back to the station, told them we'd found a campsite but no sign of the kids. The dispatcher's voice crackled back, telling us to keep searching. So, we did. We went deeper into Fox Hollow than I ever had before. Granger was quiet by now, his usual jokes replaced with nervous glances over his shoulder. It was late afternoon when we found something I still can't explain. There was this clearing, completely silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. In the center of the clearing was a small mound, like someone had piled up dirt and left it there. It wasn't the mound that bothered me, though. It was what was on top of it. A pile of shoes. Tiny shoes, like the kind you'd see on kids. Some of them were old, dirty, covered in mud, while others looked practically new, like they'd just been worn yesterday. My stomach turned, and Granger looked like he was about to be sick. "Maybe it's some kind of crank," Granger muttered, but I could tell he didn't believe it. We were standing there, trying to figure out what to do next when we heard something. A rustling sound, like leaves being dragged across the ground. We both turned at the same time, and that's when we saw it. Or him, I guess. At first I thought it was a man, just some vagrant who'd been living in the woods too long. He was hunched over, his back bent in a way that didn't seem natural. His arms were too long, his skin stretched thin, and his head... God, I don't even know how to describe it. It looked like he was wearing a mask, but it wasn't a mask. His face was twisted, contorted, like it had been melted and reshaped into something almost human, but not quite. He didn't move right either. It was like he was learning how to walk all over again. Jerky movements, his head twitching from side to side as he shuffled toward us. My hand went straight to my holster, but Granger was frozen. Couldn't blame him. I was terrified too. But cops don't get paid to be scared, so I yelled out, "Stop! Police!" The thing didn't stop. It just kept coming, slow at first, but then it broke into a run, barreling toward us faster than anything that should be able to move on two legs. I pulled my gun, fired twice, dead center. It should have dropped, but it didn't. Just kept coming. Granger finally snapped out of it, pulled his gun too, and we both unloaded on this thing. But it was like shooting at air. It didn't even flinch. I wish I could say we stood our ground, acted like the tough cops we were supposed to be, but I'd be lying. We ran. We ran like hell, crashing through the trees, barely able to keep our footing. That thing, it chased us, but it wasn't just following us. It was toying with us, cutting us off, herding us in one direction, deeper into the woods. We finally made it to a stream, and I dove into it, figuring that maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't follow us into the water. Granger was right behind me, gasping for air. I'll never forget the look on his face, the pure terror that had replaced his usual cocky grin. "Did you see it?" Granger whispered, his voice shaking. "What the hell was that?" I didn't answer. I didn't have an answer. We stayed there in the water for what felt like hours, waiting, listening. It was getting dark by the time we finally crawled out and made our way back to the road. By then, I was starting to think we'd imagined the whole thing, that maybe it was just some kind of mass hysteria. But then, we found Granger's jacket. It was lying on the road, torn to shreds. There were no footprints, no signs of a struggle, just his jacket, lying there like a forgotten piece of litter. We reported it, of course, told the chief what we'd seen, but you can imagine how that went. Nobody believed us. Missing kids, sure, but a monster in the woods? Yeah, right. We were told to take a few days off, clear our heads. But I couldn't clear my head. Neither could Granger. He stopped coming to work after that. Said he was moving, getting the hell out of Silver Grove. Can't say I blame him. I stuck around, though. Someone had to figure out what happened to those kids. A week later, the bodies were found. Well, what was left of them. They were scattered through the woods, mauled, torn apart like roadkill. But it wasn't animals. No animal could do that. I know what we saw that day wasn't human, but nobody else does. Nobody else will. The thing that lives in Fox Hollow Woods, it's still out there, and it's not done yet. I've never been one for long-winded intros, so I'll keep this simple. It was 2003, and I was about 5 years into my gig as a small-town cop in Taylor County, Kentucky. You'd think a town this size would be mostly quiet, maybe the occasional drunk stumbling around or the odd petty theft. And for the most part, that was true. Until it wasn't. My name's Logan Pratt, by the way, but that hardly matters. What matters is what went down one night in August. That night, I learned two things. One, people don't always stay missing because they're dead. And two, some things shouldn't be found. I didn't have a partner. Not by choice, though. Budget cuts made sure of that. But truth be told, I never minded working solo. Less chance for someone else to screw things up. The night shift was mine. I knew every corner of the town by heart, knew which streetlight flickered on South Elm, and which alley always smelled like bad decisions. The dispatcher called me in around midnight. "Logan, you still out there?" The static buzzed in my ear. "Yeah, what's up?" I clicked the radio back, steering my cruiser around the curve that led out of town and into the backwoods. "Got a call from a couple kids out on Route 6. Said they saw something near the old Granger farm." Granger farm. That place had been abandoned for years, ever since old man Granger disappeared. He'd gone out into the woods one night and just vanished. No body, no trace, nothing. The kind of story that keeps the town gossips busy. I muttered under my breath. Bet it's just some teenagers messing around. But I took the call. What else was I going to do? As I drove up the narrow dirt path, the woods around me closed in like they always did out there. Dark, heavy, and full of things I didn't care to think too hard about. The Granger farm appeared out of the gloom, the rotting wood and overgrown grass looking even worse than the last time I saw it. I got out of the cruiser, flashlight in hand. There were no kids, no pranksters, no nothing. Just the cold, quiet emptiness of a place long forgotten. I could have turned back, but something kept me there. Maybe it was the memory of old Granger. Maybe it was just a gut feeling. Either way, I wasn't going anywhere just yet. "All right, let's get this over with," I muttered, stepping into the tall grass that brushed against my legs like something alive. My boots crunched on gravel as I made my way toward the barn. The place had always given me the creeps. Some nights I'd drive by and swear I saw lights in the windows, but I knew better. Or I thought I did. I was halfway to the barn when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of metal scraping against metal. It was faint, like it came from far off, but it was there. And that's when I noticed the smell. You know how something can smell so bad it sticks in your throat? That's what hit me. Rotting meat, like something had been dead for way too long. I gagged, but pushed forward, my hand instinctively resting on the butt of my gun. The barn door creaked as I nudged it open with my boot. Inside, everything looked exactly how it did the last time I'd been there. Piles of rusted tools, old farm equipment gathering dust. Except for one thing. There was a trap door in the floor, one I didn't remember seeing before. Okay, Pratt, I said to myself. This is where smart people turn around. But I wasn't known for being smart, apparently. I crouched down and pulled on the rusted metal ring. The door creaked open, revealing a set of stone steps leading down into the dark. The smell hit me again, stronger this time. I gagged, but curiosity won out over common sense. I descended the stairs, each one groaning under my weight. The basement, if you could even call it that, was more like a bunker. The stone walls were cold and damp, covered in mold and God knows what else. My flashlight beam danced around, illuminating old crates and barrels, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I saw the door at the far end. A heavy iron door with a sliding peephole, like something out of a prison. I wasn't sure what I expected to find down there. Maybe old Granger had been hiding some dirty secrets. Maybe this was just another dead end. But when I slid the peephole open, my blood ran cold. On the other side of the door was a man, naked, filthy, and shackled to the wall by his ankles. His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over his bones like he hadn't eaten in weeks. And yet, he was alive. His eyes, wild and sunken, met mine through the peephole and he screamed. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. My brain tried to make sense of what I'd seen. Who the hell was that? How long had he been down here? And who put him there? The questions hit me all at once, but there wasn't time to dwell on them. The man's screams turned guttural, desperate, like an animal in a trap. I fumbled with the lock on the door, finally managing to pull it open. The stench of rot and decay was unbearable now. I pulled my shirt over my nose and stepped inside. He lunged at me, but the chains held him back. His arms flailed, and he kept screaming incoherently. It wasn't until I got closer that I saw the bite marks on his legs, ragged chunks of flesh missing, as if something had been gnawing on him. But it wasn't the marks that bothered me. It was what was gnawing on him. In the corner of the room, something moved. Something big. My flashlight caught a glimpse of it. Hairless, punched, its limbs too long and too thin to belong to anything I could name. It was chewing on one of the man's legs, its back turned to me, oblivious to my presence. The sound it made while feeding was wet and sickening, like tearing apart raw meat. My stomach turned, but I didn't have time to be nauseous. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't done, and it hadn't noticed me yet. I could have backed out, shut the door, and called for backup. Hell, that's probably what I should have done, but the thing was eating him alive. My hand went to my gun. I drew it and fired before I could second-guess myself. 3 rounds, center mass. The creature jerked back, startled, but didn't fall. Instead, it turned toward me. The face was all wrong, like someone had started with a human head but hadn't finished. The mouth stretched too wide, the teeth crooked and too sharp. I fired again. This time it dropped. I didn't stick around to check if it was dead. I ran to the man, pulling out my knife to cut him free from the chains. He was in bad shape, half-conscious, muttering something under his breath. I slung his arm over my shoulder and half-dragged him up the stairs. We barely made it to the cruiser when he started convulsing. His body thrashed and foam bubbled at his lips. I tried to steady him, but there was nothing I could do. He was dying right there in my arms. "Hold on, man. Just hold on," I muttered, trying to stay calm, but it was too late. His body went limp, and I could hear his last breath rattle out. I sat there in the dirt, covered in sweat and blood, with the dead man lying across my lap. The barn loomed behind me like some haunted relic. I didn't bother going back down into that basement. I didn't need to. Whatever I'd killed down there wasn't getting back up, but that didn't mean I was done with it. The thing had been gnawing on him for who knows how long, and God help me, I wasn't the first person to find it. There had to be more. I stayed there for what felt like hours, staring down at the lifeless body on my lap, my mind running through the sequence of events like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. The thing in that basement, whatever it was, had been feeding on him for God knows how long. That much was clear. But what haunted me even more was the realization that someone or something had put him there. This wasn't just some random accident. This was deliberate. I radioed in for backup, my voice steady despite the chaos in my head. "Dispatch, this is Pratt. I need immediate assistance at the old Granger farm. We've got a body. No, make that two. Possible homicide. Hurry." The silence from the woods pressed in around me as I waited, the only sound my own ragged breathing and the occasional rustle of leaves from the wind. My thoughts kept drifting back to the creature, the way its limbs were too long, too thin, the way its face had been distorted, almost human, but not quite. I had no idea what that thing was, but I knew it didn't belong anywhere near people. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the darkness about 20 minutes later. Sheriff Wainwright climbed out of his SUV, his face a mix of confusion and irritation. He was always more bureaucrat than lawman, a man who liked his desk a whole lot more than the field. He wasn't going to like what he was about to hear. "Pratt, what the hell is going on?" he barked, approaching the scene with a cigarette hanging from his lips. He took one look at the dead guy on the ground and froze. "Jesus." "I know," I said quietly, rising to my feet. "It's worse than it looks. There's another one in the basement, or what's left of it." Wainwright's cigarette fell from his lips, forgotten. "Another what?" "I don't know," I replied honestly. "But it's dead too. Shot it myself." He didn't ask any more questions, just followed me back into the barn. By the time we made it to the tractor, I could tell he was already regretting coming out here. The stench alone was enough to make anyone rethink their choices. "Open it," Wainwright muttered, his voice tight with tension. I yanked the door open and descended the steps. Again, the sheriff right behind me. The creature's body was sprawled in the corner, its limbs twisted and broken from where it had collapsed after I shot it. Wainwright took one look at it and stumbled backward, nearly losing his balance on the steps. "What the hell? What is that?" he gasped, covering his mouth as the smell hit him. "No idea," I replied, keeping my flashlight steady on the thing. But it was eating that guy upstairs, alive. He stared at me, wide-eyed, trying to process the scene in front of him. "Pratt, this is some next-level shit. We need to call in the feds. This ain't our jurisdiction anymore." I shook my head. "No. The feds will come in here, cover this whole thing up, and we'll never know what really happened. They'll bury it so deep no one will ever hear about it again." "You got a better plan?" Wainwright shot back, panic etching into his voice. "Look at this thing, for Christ's sake. We're in over our heads." I stared at the creature's lifeless form. Its skin was gray, stretched thin over a skeletal frame that didn't make any sense. Its mouth hung open, showing those jagged, crooked teeth. And those eyes, it was almost human, but not quite. It had been alive, moving, thinking. This thing was no animal. "I say we handle it ourselves," I finally said, my voice steady. "We clean this up, we bury it, and we make sure no one ever finds out. If the feds get involved, we lose control. This is our town, our problem." Wainwright looked like he was going to argue, but then he sighed, defeated. "Fine. But I'm telling you, Pratt, this is gonna blow up in our faces." "We'll deal with that later," I said, already moving to find something to wrap the body in. "Right now, we just need to make sure this thing stays dead." We worked in silence, dragging the creature's body up the stairs and out to the woods. It was heavier than it looked, and every step felt like a struggle against my own sanity. I couldn't stop thinking about the man it had been feeding on. How long had he been down there? And more importantly, who or what had put him there? We buried the thing deep in the woods, far enough that no one would stumble across it by accident. Wainwright wanted to burn it, but I wasn't so sure that would work. The way it moved, the way it had taken multiple shots to go down, it didn't feel like something that could be killed by fire. But we buried it anyway, just to be safe. By the time we got back to the cruiser, the sun was just starting to break over the horizon. The air felt different now, lighter somehow, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Wainwright slumped against the side of the car, rubbing his temples. "So, what now?" he asked, his voice hollow. "We move on," I said, though I wasn't sure if I even believed it myself. "The guy's dead. The thing's buried. We tell people it was some sort of animal attack. Keep the rest to ourselves." "And what about the other bodies?" Wainwright asked, his eyes dark with exhaustion. "What do we say when more people go missing?" I didn't have an answer for that. I just looked back at the barn, knowing that whatever had happened here wasn't going to stay buried for long. We drove back to town in silence, both of us knowing we'd crossed a line we couldn't come back from. We'd taken care of the immediate threat, sure, but that didn't mean there weren't more like it. For all we knew, the Granger farm was just one of many. When I finally got home, I collapsed into bed, still in my uniform, not bothering to shower or eat. My mind was a mess, but one thought kept coming back to me. Who else had known about the thing in the basement? And how many more were out there? The next day, I got up, went to work, and acted like everything was normal. The report said wild animal attack, and the town bought it. Wainwright and I never spoke about it again, but sometimes, late at night, I think about that thing, buried out there in the woods, and I wonder if we really did kill it, or just pissed it off. There are three kinds of people in this world: the ones who avoid trouble, the ones who cause it, and then there's me, the idiot who runs straight into it. I've been on the force in Galloway, a small nowhere town in Mississippi, for about 9 years, and I've seen my share of weird. But none of it prepared me for what went down in the summer of 2016. Yeah, my name's Ray Bradner, and when you spend as much time working out in the sticks as I have, you get used to things. You know, the kind of stuff that makes city folk panic. You find dead deer on the highway, or you have to chase down some drunk idiot on a four-wheeler. But there's a pattern to life here. That is until one day, that pattern shattered like a cheap mirror. It started like any other night shift. The town was quiet, almost too quiet, and I had one of those nagging feelings in my gut. You know the kind, where your brain's telling you everything's fine, but your stomach's like, nah, something's off. Of course, I ignored it. After all, I had a job to do, and I wasn't about to let a gut feeling get in the way of that. I had just finished my third cup of bad coffee when the call came in. Some teenagers out at Crickmore Lake were missing. I'm talking 2 kids from the local high school who decided to play rebel and drive out to the lake for some moonlit fun. They hadn't returned, and it had been almost 12 hours. The dispatcher, Liz, said their parents were starting to freak out. It's the kind of thing you hear about every so often, especially with kids wanting to blow off steam in the woods. But what struck me as odd was the lake. Nobody goes there anymore. Crickmore Lake used to be a popular hangout, until about 10 years ago when some kid drowned. They never found his body, and since then, people avoided it. Superstitions run deep here. Now, I don't buy into all that paranormal stuff, but the place did have a strange vibe, like the air was always thicker there. I figured I'd check it out, though I didn't expect to find much more than a couple of teenagers passed out drunk by the shore. That's usually how these things go. Maybe a little weed, maybe some bad decisions, but nothing I couldn't handle. The drive to the lake was a good 30 minutes, and about halfway through, I realized I'd forgotten my sidearm back at the station. I cursed under my breath. but I wasn't about to turn back. Besides, it wasn't like I needed it, right? After all, what was I gonna do? Shoot some kids for skipping curfew? As I pulled up, the first thing that hit me was the silence. The woods here were usually alive with crickets and frogs, but tonight, nothing. Not even a breeze. It was the kind of quiet that makes you realize just how alone you are. I killed the engine and stepped out, flashlight in hand. The beam of light cut through the trees as I made my way to the edge of the lake. That's when I saw the car. It was parked crookedly, half on the dirt trail, half in the underbrush. The doors were open, and there were a few beer cans scattered around. No kids in sight. I called out, "Hey, Sheriff's Department!" But there was no response. Great, I thought. Probably wandered off into the woods. I did a quick scan of the area, looking for any sign of them. And that's when I saw it. A trail of footprints leading away from the car, deep into the forest. The prints looked fresh, 2 sets, but there was something odd about them. I couldn't quite place it at first, but the more I looked, the more I realized they were uneven, like one of them had been dragged. I hesitated. Look, I'm not ashamed to admit it, but something about the whole scene gave me the creeps. Still, I wasn't about to call for backup over a couple of footprints. I followed the trail, moving deeper into the woods, the flashlight bouncing with each step. After about 10 minutes of walking, I found the first kid. He was hanging from a tree. At first, I thought it was some kind of sick prank. You know how kids are. They watch too many horror movies and think they're invincible. But as I got closer, I realized this was no joke. The kid's body was limp, arms dangling, his face twisted in this horrible frozen scream. His clothes were torn, but there was no blood, just deep, long scratches down his torso. I backed up, my heart pounding. I've seen some messed up things in my time, but this was something else. It didn't make sense. There were no ropes or marks to suggest he'd been hung up there. It was like something had just thrown him. I radioed in. "Liz, we got a problem out here. You're gonna need to call in the state police." Liz's voice crackled through the speaker. "What's going on, Ray?" "Kid's dead. Not sure how. You might want to tell him to bring out forensics. This ain't right." As I waited for her to respond, I heard a noise. Not the kind you expect in the woods, like branches snapping or leaves rustling. It was this low, raspy sound like breathing. My flashlight flickered, and I swear, for just a second, I caught a glimpse of something in the trees. Something big, bigger than any animal I've ever seen. It moved fast, and by the time I swung the light around, it was gone. I swallowed hard, trying to shake the feeling crawling up my spine. I'm not a man who scares easily, but something about this was off. I started backing up, heading toward the car, when I heard the second scream. It was high-pitched, desperate, and it echoed through the trees like a wild animal. It wasn't far off, and I knew immediately that it wasn't a kid. It was something else, something wrong. I bolted in the direction of the sound, ignoring every instinct screaming at me to run the other way. The flashlight bobbed wildly as I stumbled through the underbrush, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was adrenaline, maybe it was just plain stupidity, but I kept moving, pushing deeper into the darkness. Then I saw it. Or, I saw him. The second kid was lying face down in the dirt, not moving. And standing over him was, well, I can't even explain it right. It looked like a man, but his body was twisted, hunched, with these long, sinewy arms that seemed too long for his frame. His skin was dark, like it had been charred, and there were patches of fur in random places, almost like some kind of mutation. But it was the way he moved, quick and jerky, like a predator. I froze. I wanted to scream, to tell the thing to back off, but my voice caught in my throat. It didn't seem to notice me at first, and for a moment, I thought I was safe. Then it turned its head toward me. I didn't need to see its face to know I was in deep trouble. It lunged toward me, Yeah, I'm using that word, sue me, and I ducked just in time to avoid its claws. That's when I remembered I didn't have my gun. Figures, right? I'm out here playing hero, and I leave my one form of defense back at the station like an idiot. I scrambled backward, my boots catching on the roots of a tree, and fell hard on my back. The thing didn't stop. It came at me, its arms reaching out like it was going to rip me apart. I managed to grab a fallen branch and swung it with everything I had. It made contact, but barely flinched. It let out a noise, a kind of choking snarl, and swiped at me. I felt the sting of its claws rip through my shirt, but I rolled away before it could do more damage. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline pushing me forward, and took off in the opposite direction. I didn't look back, but I could hear it following me, crashing through the trees like a freight train. My mind was racing, and I knew I didn't have long. If I didn't find some way to stop it, I was dead. Then I saw it. The old hunting cabin. It was about 50 yards away, nestled in the trees, half hidden by the brush. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted toward it, my lungs burning, and threw myself inside. The door slammed behind me, and I jammed a rusty old chair under the knob, hoping it would hold. For a moment, there was silence. Then the thing slammed into the door with a force that rattled the whole cabin. I backed up, looking around for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes landed on an old hunting rifle mounted on the wall. I grabbed it, my hands shaking as I checked the chamber. There were 2 rounds. Better than nothing. The door groaned as the creature hit it again, harder this time. I raised the rifle, aimed at the door, and waited. The wood splintered, and I caught a glimpse of its twisted form through the cracks. I didn't think. I just fired. The shot echoed in the small cabin, and the creature let out a sound that made my skin crawl. It wasn't dead, but it was hurt. I fired again, this time aiming for its chest. The thing staggered, its body twitching, and then collapsed in the doorway. I didn't move for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I waited for it to get up, to come at me again. But it didn't. It just lay there, its body twisted and broken, like some kind of freakish experiment gone wrong. When the state police finally showed up, they didn't know what to make of it. Hell, I didn't know what to make of it either. But there it was, lying dead on the floor, proof that whatever it was, it existed. And now it was gone. They bagged it up, took it away, and told me not to talk about it. Said it was some kind of animal attack, but I know better. That thing wasn't an animal. It was something else. Something we weren't supposed to find. They tried to cover it up, but the truth is, once you see something like that, you can't just forget it. I'm not one for conspiracy theories, but whatever that thing was, it wasn't from around here. It wasn't from anywhere. The smell of gasoline and coffee was always the start to my shifts. I guess that's just what you get when you're a cop in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico. The year was 1996, and my name's Toby Mathers. I've been working as a small-town officer for about 8 years, ever since I decided that flying airplanes wasn't my thing. Funny, right? I went from wanting to be up in the clouds to pulling double shifts on flat, open roads where tumbleweeds are more common than speeders. But hey, at least the job kept me grounded. Literally. Being a cop in a place where there are fewer people than there are rattlesnakes has its perks. Most days, I could go my entire shift without seeing a single soul. The town had about 2,000 people, give or take, and the most exciting thing I'd handled up until that day was a dispute between 2 neighbors over a barbecue grill. But that morning, I was sipping on my 3rd cup of coffee and thinking about whether to grab a breakfast burrito when I got the call that would ruin my appetite. "Mathers," crackled the radio. "We got a situation up by Old Route 77. Could be worth your time." I sighed. "You mean there's finally something out here that's not a cactus?" I took a slow drag from my coffee as the dispatcher filled me in on the details. Missing hiker, last seen the night before. He'd been camping in an area known for wild animals, though no one could say for sure what kind. Great, I muttered, setting down my cup. Just what I wanted. Babysitting a lost tourist who probably just wandered too far from his tent. I revved up my cruiser and started out toward old Route 77, where the mountains began to rise like broken teeth. The scenery was beautiful in a desolate kind of way, but I didn't have time for that. Not today. The closer I got, the more I felt that tightness in my chest, the one you get when something's not quite right. It's a cop thing, I guess. Years of routine, followed by a gut feeling you couldn't explain if you tried. I arrived at the campsite around 10 a.m. 2 tents, both zipped up and undisturbed, sat in the clearing, surrounded by thick pine and scrub brush. A few scattered items, boots, a half-open backpack and some trail mix, told me someone had been there, but there were no signs of panic, no ripped fabric, no bloodstains, no signs of a struggle. Still, it felt too quiet, even for a place like this. I made my way over to the backpack, my boots crunching on dry twigs as I went. Opening it up, I found nothing out of the ordinary. Some water bottles, a map, flashlight, the usual stuff hikers bring. Except there was no wallet, no ID. Weird. I moved on to the tent, leaning down to unzip it, but just as I did, I heard something. A rustling, off in the trees to my right. I froze, hand on the zipper, listening hard. Maybe it was the wind or an animal, but my gut said otherwise. Slowly, I straightened up, one hand drifting toward the Glock at my side. "All right," I called out, my voice sharp. "If you're out there, now's the time to show yourself. No funny business, okay?" Nothing. I waited a few more seconds, trying to decide if I should feel like an idiot or prepare to draw my weapon. Then, another sound. Closer this time. It wasn't rustling. It was more like crunching, like something heavy moving slowly through the brush. "Okay," I muttered to myself. I didn't sign up for an episode of The X-Files. Moving cautiously, I edged toward the noise, stepping between the scattered rocks and tree roots. The closer I got, the more I could smell something off, like rotting meat left out too long. That was when I spotted it. A pair of boots sticking out from behind a low boulder. "Hey!" I shouted, breaking into a run. But as I rounded the corner of the rock, I stopped cold. It was the hiker, or what was left of him. His body lay face down in the dirt, the back of his shirt torn open and soaked in dark red. His arms were spread out, fingers still clutching the earth as if he'd been trying to crawl away from something. But that wasn't what got me. It was his back. The entire thing had been chewed. Not clawed, not cut. Chewed. Large chunks of flesh were missing, gnawed away by teeth bigger than anything I'd ever seen. I had seen coyotes and wild dogs get into things before, but this wasn't the work of any animal I knew of. I pulled back quickly, trying to fight the rising bile in my throat. Whatever did this had to be close, real close. As I stumbled back to my cruiser, fumbling for the radio, that sound came again, the crunching, louder. This time it was followed by a low, heavy breath, like air being forced out of something much larger than me. I whipped around, eyes scanning the tree line, but there was nothing there. Just silence. I keyed the radio, voice shaky but trying to stay professional. "Dispatch, this is Mathers. You've got a fatality out here. It's bad. Looks like some kind of animal attack, but it's weird. I'm requesting immediate backup." There was a crackle, then silence. "Mathers, you cut out. Repeat. Did you say animal attack?" I looked down at the hiker's body again. This wasn't just some mountain lion. "Yeah," I said, wiping the sweat from my brow. "Something like that." As I turned back toward the car, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The crunching had stopped, and then so did everything else. No wind, no rustling, nothing. Just that heavy breath, now right behind me. Instinct kicked in. I bolted for the cruiser, my boots barely touching the ground, heart hammering. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and jammed the keys into the ignition. But before I could start it, there was a thud, a deep, solid thump on the hood. I didn't want to look, I really didn't. But I looked. There, standing in front of my car, was the biggest, ugliest thing I'd ever laid eyes on. Imagine if a bear and a boar had an unholy love child, then threw in the head of a pit bull for good measure. It stood on all fours, but its front limbs were longer, almost like arms, tipped with jagged, yellowing claws. Its fur was matted, a greasy dark brown, but what really made me want to throw up were its teeth. They were long, sharp, and way too large for its snout, poking out in every direction like twisted ivory. It didn't belong here, or anywhere for that matter. I grabbed my Glock, pointing it directly at the thing, but it didn't move. Just stood there, watching me. It was too calm, too confident, like it knew I didn't have a chance. Hell, maybe I didn't, but I wasn't going down without a fight. "Back up," I shouted, voice shaking despite my best effort. "I swear to God I'll shoot." It didn't back up. Instead, it took a step closer, slow and deliberate, its breath fogging up the windshield as it pressed its head against the glass. The thing was daring me to pull the trigger, so I did. I emptied my entire clip into its face, but the bullets didn't do jack. They hit for sure. There was a spray of blood, and the creature flinched back, but it was more like I'd just pissed. It let out a sound, not a roar, but more of a deep, rattling snarl, before slamming its massive claws into the hood of my car. That's when I panicked. I threw the cruiser into reverse, tires screeching as I peeled out of there, the creature chasing me down the dirt road. It was fast, too fast for something that size. It kept up with the car, ramming into the back and sides like it was playing a game. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I swerved down the mountain road, trying to shake the thing. But then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. I didn't stop to find out where it went. I didn't care. All I knew was I had to get the hell out of there. I sped back into town, pulling up outside the station like a madman. Bursting through the door, I found my partner Rick lounging in his chair, feet up on the desk. "Toby, man, you look like you just saw Elvis back from the dead," he chuckled, eyes narrowing when he saw my face. I couldn't speak. I was still shaking, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I grabbed him by the arm, yanking him toward the door. "We've got to go back out there." I finally managed to get out. "Something killed a guy, and it tried to kill me." Rick frowned, slowly lowering his feet. "You serious?" "Dead serious. Now get your ass in gear." We headed back out to Old Route 77, this time in Rick's cruiser, loaded up with extra firepower, rifles, shotguns, the works. But when we got there, the body was gone. No blood, no backpack, no tents. Just an empty clearing and the smell of something foul lingering in the air. Rick looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Toby, are you sure?" "I'm sure, Rick," I cut him off. "I saw it, and I shot it." Rick crouched down, scanning the ground for any sign of a struggle. After a few minutes, he found something. A large, broken branch with thick, dark fur caught in the bark. His eyes went wide. "Okay, maybe you're not crazy." "Thanks," I muttered. "Glad you're on board now." We didn't stick around much longer after that. I mean, we're dumb, but we're not that dumb. We reported it, of course, but you know how these things go. Paperwork gets shuffled, explanations get drawn up about wild dogs or coyotes, and that's the end of it. Except it wasn't the end. Because every now and then, when I'm out on patrol, I catch a whiff of that same foul smell. And I know that thing's still out there somewhere in the mountains, waiting for another hiker to make a wrong turn. The strangest part about being a cop in a small town is that you know everyone. But when something goes wrong, it's like you didn't know them at all. This wasn't what I expected when I first started out here in Gold Creek, Oklahoma, back in 1994. My name's Daryl Strand, and I've been the town's go-to for every little thing, from disputes about cows trespassing on properties to investigating suspicious shadows in a barn at 2 a.m. You learn to laugh it off most days, but sometimes you realize that not everything can be brushed aside with a sarcastic remark or a shrug. Now, I'm not one to complain. Life's simple out here. I grew up nearby in Shawnee, where the biggest excitement was a tornado warning, or the annual festival that somehow always ended in some cousin of mine getting into a fistfight over barbecue. Gold Creek, on the other hand, was smaller, quieter, and up until last month, I'd have sworn it was safe. But if you've ever met someone who thought living in a quiet town meant life wasn't dangerous, you've met a fool. It was July 23rd, 1994, when things started to get weird. I was at the station flipping through paperwork when the call came in. A guy named Reggie Wendell, who ran the local diner, was yelling about his missing wife. Now, Reggie's a hothead. He's been in a couple of bar brawls in his day, so when I picked up the phone and heard him screaming, I figured it was just another one of their lovers' quarrels, the kind where one of them storms off and hides at their sister's place for the weekend. "She's gone, Daryl." Reggie's voice was cracking. "She never made it home last night." I glanced at the clock. It was just shy of 6 p.m. That's when I realized something was off. She'd been gone for a full day, and Reggie hadn't called until now. He said he'd looked everywhere, asked around, but no one had seen her since she left the diner around 8 p.m. the night before. "Did you check out by the lake?" I asked. "She could have gone there to cool off after y'all had a spat." No, it ain't like that this time. Daryl, you've got to help me." That last bit struck me. Reggie didn't ask for help unless he was neck deep in something serious. I told him I'd head over to his place and take a look around. I wasn't expecting much, honestly. Maybe she'd gone off to Tulsa or stayed at a friend's place. People do crazy things when they need space. But when I got to the Wendell house, Reggie was sitting on the front porch, shaking like a dog in a thunderstorm. "She's not here, Daryl. I swear to God," he muttered. His eyes were darting all over the place, like he was expecting something to jump out at him. "You call her family yet?" I asked, stepping up to him. "Yeah. They haven't heard from her since yesterday either." I nodded. "All right, let's check the woods. Maybe she's just cooling off somewhere." We headed behind the house towards the tree line. Gold Creek is surrounded by thick woods. There are a couple of small clearings here and there, but mostly it's a tangled mess of branches and undergrowth, the kind of place you don't wander into without a solid reason. As we walked, I asked Reggie more questions: what she was wearing, where she was last seen. He kept giving me the same shaky answers. His hands twitched like he wanted to grab something, but I figured it was nerves. After a good 15 minutes of walking, we found a path that led deeper into the woods. Reggie stopped at the entrance, and his face went pale. I raised an eyebrow. "You all right?" She wouldn't have gone down there," he whispered. Now, I'd heard some dumb things in my time, but this was starting to smell like fear. And fear, especially around here, was never without reason. "What's down there?" I asked, half joking. "You got some kind of critter hiding in the trees?" Reggie didn't answer. He just stared into the woods like something was watching him. I followed his gaze but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. It was the same twisted trees, moss-covered trunks, and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. "Reggie, get a grip, man," I said, a bit harder than I meant to. "We're just looking for your wife. You want to tell me why you're so damn spooked?" "I don't know, Daryl," he muttered. "I just got a feeling. A bad one." I snorted. "Feelings don't solve problems, Reggie." But as soon as I said it, the air changed. I don't know how to describe it. The temperature hadn't dropped, and nothing obvious had shifted, but suddenly it felt wrong, like the woods were too quiet, and not the kind of quiet you get on a calm day. It was an unnatural silence. No birds, no insects. Just the two of us standing there, listening to our own breathing. "All right," I said, pulling my flashlight from my belt. "Let's get this over with." Reggie didn't argue. He just followed me, his shoulders hunched like he was trying to make himself smaller. We walked the path for another 10 minutes before we found it, the clearing. And in the middle of that clearing was something that made my blood run cold. A shoe. Just one. A woman's sneaker, lying on its side in the dirt. "That hers?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Reggie nodded, his face as pale as a ghost. I stepped closer, shining the flashlight around the area. The trees were thick, almost too thick, like they were leaning in on us. There was no sign of a struggle, no footprints other than our own. But the shoe, it was wrong. I crouched down, examining the dirt. "No tracks," I muttered. "But that doesn't make sense. If she dropped it while running, we'd see something." "She didn't run," Reggie whispered. "She was taken." I looked up at him. "Taken? By who?" "I don't know," he stammered, his eyes wide. "But I've heard stories. About the woods. About something that lives out here. Something that takes people." At this point, I wanted to smack him upside the head for feeding into some backwoods superstition. But before I could say anything, a rustling sound came from the trees to our left. We both froze. The rustling got louder, like something was moving toward us, slowly but deliberately. I stood up, my hand instinctively going to the holster on my belt. I hadn't drawn my gun yet, but I was damn close. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is Officer Strand with the Gold Creek Police Department. Show yourself." Silence. Then, out of nowhere, Reggie took off running. The coward bolted back down the path we'd come from, and for a second, I thought about chasing him. But something told me to stay where I was. The rustling started again, this time from the opposite side of the clearing. It was moving fast, circling me. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something was out there, watching, waiting. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my ground, pulling my gun and holding it steady. "All right," I muttered under my breath. "Come out." That's when I saw it, a flash of movement in the trees. It was quick, like a shadow darting between the trunks. Then another flash, closer this time. My pulse quickened. Whatever it was toying with me. I tightened my grip on the gun, my finger hovering over the trigger. The thing circled again, and this time I caught a glimpse of its form, tall, gangly, with limbs that moved unnaturally fast. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, like it hadn't seen sunlight in decades. But what threw me off the most was the size of it. It was bigger than a human, much bigger, like it had been stretched out and twisted into something no longer bound by human proportions. I'd seen plenty of animals in these woods, bobcats, coyotes, even a black bear once. But this wasn't anything I recognized. It moved like a deer, but with the swiftness of a predator. And the sound it made, God, the sound. It was like bones cracking in slow motion. I raised the gun higher, aiming into the darkness. "Come on," I said, louder this time. "Show yourself." It obliged. The thing lunged from the shadows, its long arms reaching for me. I fired once, twice, 3 times, but it was fast, too fast. The bullets hit the trees behind it as it closed the distance. I barely had time to react before it was on me, knocking me to the ground with a force that knocked the wind out of my lungs. I scrambled back, gasping for air, but the creature didn't follow. It stood over me, towering above, its head cocked to the side like it was studying me. I could see its chest rising and falling in shallow breaths, hear the faintest sound of something wet. Then, without warning, it turned and bolted back into the trees, disappearing as quickly as it had come. I lay there for a moment, staring up at the sky, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My hand was still clenched around the gun, but my arm was too shaky to hold it steady. After a few minutes, I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling beneath me. Reggie was gone. No sign of him or his wife, anywhere. I turned back to the house. I forced myself to my feet, adrenaline still coursing through my veins, and I started down the path back to Reggie's house. My mind raced, trying to process what I had just seen. It wasn't human, that much was obvious, but no animal moved like that either. It was something else, something I'd never seen before, something I couldn't explain. As I got closer to Reggie's place, the trees seemed to close in around me, every rustle of leaves sending a chill down my spine. The gun felt heavy in my hand, but I wasn't about to put it away. Not until I was back in the light, out of these cursed woods. I broke through the tree line and spotted Reggie's house up ahead. The porch light was still on, but Reggie was nowhere to be seen. I hurried toward the house, hoping against hope that maybe he'd made it back and was hiding inside. But when I reached the porch, I saw the door hanging open. I froze. "Reggie?" I called out, my voice shaking slightly. "You in there?" No answer. I stepped inside, gun still drawn, and swept the small living room with my flashlight. It was empty. The kitchen, empty. I moved toward the back of the house, dread settling deeper into my bones with every step. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and I nudged it open with the barrel of my gun. The room was dark, but the smell hit me first. Metallic, thick, like iron. My stomach churned as I shone the light into the room, and that's when I saw it. Reggie, or what was left of him. His body was sprawled across the floor, his chest torn open, blood pooling around him in a sickeningly large puddle. But it wasn't just the sight of Reggie's mangled corpse that froze me in place. It was the fact that something had been feeding on him. The creature was still there, crouched in the far corner of the room, its long limbs folding and unfolding as it gnawed at what remained of Reggie's torso. I could see its pale, twisted form more clearly now, punched over like some grotesque, elongated spider. For a split second I thought about firing the gun. My finger twitched on the trigger, but the thing didn't react. It didn't even seem to notice me. I slowly backed out of the room, my heart hammering in my chest. If it hadn't seen me yet, I wasn't about to give it a reason to. Step by step, I made my way down the hallway, praying I wouldn't step on a creaky floorboard or make some noise that would alert the thing to my presence. My breathing was shallow, barely audible, and every inch of my body was screaming for me to run. But I didn't. Not yet. When I reached the front door, I paused, casting one last glance over my shoulder. The creature hadn't moved. It was still feasting on Reggie, oblivious to the world around it. Part of me wanted to shoot it, to end whatever hellish nightmare this thing had brought to our town. But a bigger part of me knew better. There was no winning against something like that. So I turned and bolted out of the house, my feet hitting the porch steps with a force that rattled my bones. I didn't stop running until I was back in my squad car parked just down the road. I slammed the door shut, threw the car into drive, and peeled out of there like my life depended on it. And maybe it did. I drove straight to the station, heart still pounding, hands shaking so hard I could barely keep the wheel steady. I thought about calling for backup, but what the hell was I supposed to tell them? That some monstrous creature was out in the woods killing people? That it had just torn Reggie apart like a goddamn piece of meat? No one would believe me. I didn't even believe myself. By the time I got back to the station, I was in a daze. I sat in the car for what felt like hours, staring out into the darkness, my mind replaying everything I'd seen. Reggie was dead. His wife was still missing. And that thing, whatever it was still out there. But I couldn't just leave it at that. I couldn't just sit here and pretend like this didn't happen. So I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the radio and called it in. "Dispatch, this is Officer Strand. We've got a situation." The response came quickly, static crackling through the speaker. "What's the situation, Strand?" I hesitated for a moment, trying to find the words. "Reggie Wendell's dead. I found his body at his house." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a confused, "What do you mean dead? What happened?" I took a deep breath, my mind racing. It wasn't natural. There's something in the woods. Something wrong. Another long silence. Officer Strand, are you requesting backup? I thought about it, about sending more people into those woods. But what good would that do? If whatever was out there could tear a man apart in seconds, what chance did we have? Just send someone to secure the scene, I said finally. I'll be waiting. I hung up the radio and sat there, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but one thing was for sure. Gold Creek was no longer the quiet, safe town I'd once believed it to be. As I waited for backup to arrive, I kept my eyes on the woods, watching for any sign of movement. I half expected to see that thing again, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. But the trees remained still, and the night air was quiet, too quiet. It's funny how some people assume a small town is just that, small, sleepy, and uneventful. I've heard jokes from city folk about how the most excitement in places like this comes from gossiping about a neighbor's broken fence. But let me tell you, after what I went through in the summer of 2011, small-town life isn't as harmless as it seems. My name's Grant Frawley, and I've been a cop in Knoxdale, Virginia for the last 8 years. Honestly, the town itself is nothing to write home about. Less than 2,000 people, mostly farmers or retirees who like to sit on their porches and talk about the weather. I joined the department because, well, I needed a steady job, and my dad had been the sheriff here for 25 years. When he retired, he tossed me the badge, and that was that. Never saw myself as much of a protector, but hey, it paid the bills, and people respected me. Besides, it wasn't like we were dealing with gang wars or bank heists. It was Knoxdale. The most exciting thing I dealt with up until that point was a few drunk teens knocking over mailboxes. Things changed in June. It was one of those muggy days where the air felt like it was pressing down on you, making everything move slower. I was on my usual patrol, cruising down Pine Hollow Road, pretty much the only road that takes you out of town. It runs straight through the forest before curving up toward the mountains. Now you'd think a road cutting through a forest would be full of wildlife sightings, but most animals kept their distance from town. Except for that day. I had just passed the old Thompson farm when I saw something strange up ahead. At first, I thought it was a deer standing in the middle of the road, which wasn't uncommon. But as I got closer, I realized it was much too big to be a deer. Its back was hunched, legs too long and twisted, almost like it wasn't meant to stand that way. And its skin, well, it wasn't fur. It looked like the cracked, leathery hide of an elephant, but slick and dark, almost like it was wet. The thing didn't move as I approached, just stood there still as a statue, except for its head, which jerked around like it couldn't decide which way to look. I slowed the cruiser down, gripping the steering wheel tightly, my pulse picking up. It turned its head toward me, and though I couldn't make out any facial details, I felt this creeping dread. You ever have one of those moments where every instinct in your body screams at you to get out of there? Yeah, that was it. But you know, being a cop means pushing past those instincts sometimes. I grabbed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Frawley. Got something in the road on Pine Hollow. Gonna check it out." "Roger that, Frawley. Need backup?" "Negative," I said. Though if I'm honest, part of me wanted to shout, "Hell yes." I cut the engine, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. The forest around me was too quiet. No birds, no wind, nothing. It was like the whole place was holding its breath. I called out, "Hey, move along now." The thing twitched but didn't budge. I tried again, louder this time, walking a few steps closer. "Come on, get off the road." What happened next is still something I can't fully wrap my head around. The thing bolted, fast. It wasn't running like any animal I'd ever seen. Its body stretched, limbs cracking into new shapes as it dropped to all fours and tore off into the trees. The sound of it moving through the brush was like breaking bones mixed with the crunch of leaves. and just like that, it was gone. I stood there, frozen for a second, trying to process what I'd just seen. The rational part of my brain told me it was probably just a mangled coyote, or maybe a black bear with some disease that made its fur fall out. But deep down, I knew neither of those made sense. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't normal. I drove back to the station and filed a report, but left out the details about how it moved and how I felt. No need to give the boys something to rib me about for the rest of the year. For the next few weeks, nothing unusual happened. Life went back to its slow pace, but I couldn't shake that feeling of unease, like something was waiting out there in the woods. Then the disappearances started. It was the Anderson kid first. He was about 14, always out hunting with his dad. One morning, his mom calls the station, frantic. Says he didn't come back after going into the woods. We gathered a search party. Half the town showed up with flashlights and hunting dogs. I figured the kid had probably just wandered off too far, maybe lost track of time. People didn't just go missing in Knoxdale. We searched all night, but there was no sign of him. The dogs couldn't pick up any scent, which was odd, considering the kid's trail should have been fresh. The next day, we found his hunting rifle, but no blood, no tracks, nothing to explain where he went. A few days later, a woman named Mabel Hurst, old widow, lived alone near the edge of town, disappeared too. Same deal. Her door was wide open, lights still on, but she was gone without a trace. The town started buzzing, people talking about whether someone was snatching folks up. But there was no evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle. It was like they'd just vanished. Things escalated quickly after that. 2 more people went missing, a farmhand named Jimmy Kepler and an out-of-towner passing through on a road trip. The whole town was on edge. People stopped going out at night, locking their doors tight. A few folks even started keeping their guns close. I couldn't help but think back to that thing I saw on Pine Hollow Road. It sounded crazy, but something in me was convinced that whatever was out there was connected to these disappearances. I didn't tell anyone, though. How could I? A cop talking about monsters wasn't going to go over well. One night, I got a call from Roger Thornton. He owned a small ranch just outside of town and claimed one of his cows had gone missing. Said he found something strange near the woods. Bones. Not just animal bones either. Human bones, he said. I drove out to his place, the darkness pressing in thick around the beams of my headlights. Roger met me at the gate, his face pale, a shotgun in his hands. He led me out to the edge of his property, where the tall grass gave way to a dense line of trees. That's when I saw them. Scattered across the dirt were bones, picked clean. Some of them were big, others small, but the shape of them made it clear these weren't animal remains. Jesus, Roger, I muttered, crouching down to get a closer look. Why the hell didn't you call this in sooner? He looked at me, fear in his eyes. Didn't want to believe it, Frawley. Didn't want to think something like this was happening here. I couldn't blame him. Part of me didn't want to believe it either. But there they were, real as the ground beneath my feet. I stood up, scanning the tree line. There was a gnawing pit in my stomach, the same feeling I'd had on Pine Hollow. I didn't need to be a forensic expert to know what we were dealing with wasn't a person. It was something else. Something that hunted. We need to get the hell out of here, I said, my voice low. Roger nodded, gripping his shotgun tighter. But before we could make it back to the house, a low, distant noise reached our ears. Not a howl, but more like the deep thrum of something large moving through the underbrush. We both froze. The sound grew louder, coming toward us with unnatural speed. Roger took a step back, his eyes wide with terror. Frawley, what the hell is that? I didn't have time to answer. Out of the trees burst that same creature I'd seen weeks earlier, its grotesque body moving impossibly fast as it charged toward us. Roger fired his shotgun, the blast echoing through the night, but it didn't slow the thing down. It slammed into him, knocking him to the ground before he could reload. I barely had time to draw my sidearm before the creature lunged at me. I fired off 3 rounds, center mass, before it crumpled to the ground with a thud. My heart was hammering in my chest as I stood over its body, my gun still smoking. Roger lay there, bloodied but alive, staring at the creature in disbelief. It looked even more horrifying up close. Its skin was a patchwork of leathery scales and sickly pale patches that resembled a snake's belly. Its long limbs ended in claws that looked like they'd been borrowed from some prehistoric predator. Roger let out a shaky breath, his voice barely above a whisper. "What the hell is that thing?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that it wasn't from this world, at least not the part of the world I knew. The next morning, we called in a team from the state to come investigate the bones in the creature's body. For once, I wasn't the crazy one. They saw it too, and whatever that thing was, it was real enough to scare the hell out of the experts. They took the bones for further analysis, but the body stayed where it was. No one wanted to touch it. A few days later, the disappearances stopped. The town went back to its sleepy routine, but the quiet felt different now, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something else to happen. As for me, I still patrol the same roads, still pass by Pine Hollow every now and then. But now I keep my sidearm a little closer, and when the wind picks up in the trees, I can't help but wonder what's lurking just out of sight. The truth, I don't care what the experts say. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't the only one. "30 years of quiet ain't much to complain about, though now that I'm thinking back on it, maybe I was too comfortable. I'm Simon Renshaw, and in the year 2003, I was the deputy chief in a tiny town just outside St. Mary, Montana. You've probably never heard of it. Montana's full of places like that. This was one of those backwater areas where people knew your business before you did. You get it, I'm sure. Small town, small minds, and I was right there with them. 30 years on the force, dealing with cattle thieves and meth heads, thinking I'd seen everything. Until that call. A guy like me doesn't forget a night like that. I was on duty, already clocked in, paperwork stacked on the desk in the station, when it came through. The dispatch call had a tone I didn't like, real rattled. There had been reports of a wreck out near the Blackfoot Reservation. Normally it'd be Highway Patrol's issue, but apparently they were stretched thin, so it fell to me. Lucky me. By the time I arrived, it was clear this wasn't just a regular roadside accident. The wreck wasn't even on the road. It was about 50 feet deep in the forest, the vehicle half crumpled against a pine. But it wasn't the truck that got me. It was the smell. It hit me like a wall when I stepped out of the car. Something rank, like meat left out too long. I gagged, which, isn't something I do often. But what really sent a shiver down my spine, besides the stench, was the fact that the entire front half of the truck looked peeled open, like something had taken it in its fists and torn it like an old toy. The body they pulled out, I'll just say it didn't come out in one piece. I radioed for backup, though it felt useless out there. We were way past the town limits, close to the reservation border, and reception was dodgy at best. Still, I tried. No response. Not from dispatch, not from anyone. It was like the whole world had gone mute. "Jesus, what am I even looking at?" I muttered, taking a step closer to inspect what was left of the driver. His arms had been torn off at odd angles, and his legs, hell, those were just missing. I wasn't green by any stretch of the imagination, but this wasn't something you see in any crash. Now I know what you're thinking. Maybe it was a bear or mountain lion, but let me stop you right there. I've seen plenty of animal attacks. This wasn't that. Nothing chewed on him. He was ripped apart, pulled apart. I can't even put it into better words. I guess at this point, I should have left, called it quits. But something about the whole scene wasn't adding up, and curiosity got the better of me. Call it cop instinct or stupidity. It's pretty much the same thing after 30 years. I figured maybe someone else was nearby. Maybe the guy hadn't been alone. Or maybe whatever did this was still here. Real comforting thought, right? So I headed into the woods. No flashlight. Stupid of me in hindsight. But the moon was bright enough that I could make out the trees and ground well enough. I walked deeper, following a trail of what looked like drag marks in the dirt. I wish I'd brought more than just a standard issue Glock because, in the back of my mind, I knew something bigger was waiting ahead. The trees got denser the further I went. The smell got worse too. It was like walking into a butcher shop, except there was nothing fresh about it, just rot. And then I saw it. At first I thought it was another wreck, some junk or debris, but no, it was a body, a fresh one. I found out later his name was Mike Renfro, one of the local boys who worked the ranches nearby. He was lying half buried under a mess of branches, or what I thought were branches. When I knelt down to inspect him, I saw his chest was caved in like a watermelon dropped from a high roof. I'll spare you the details of what I saw beneath the broken rib cage, but I'll tell you this much. Whoever or whatever had done it had strength beyond anything human. I pulled myself back, bile rising in my throat, and that's when I heard it. The sound. Not a growl, not something animalistic. It was like heavy breathing, but deeper, rhythmic. Too deliberate to be an animal, too unsettling to be human. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks, but the rustling in the bushes told me otherwise. There was something moving, fast and low, between the trees. I gripped my Glock, thumbed off the safety, and stayed absolutely still, listening. My heart was hammering, but my instincts, those 30 years of being a cop, kept me calm, at least for the moment. And then it was on me. I didn't get a good look at it, not at first. It moved too fast, slamming into me from the side. The impact set me flying into the dirt, my side exploding in pain. The gun slipped from my hand, and all I could do was scramble to my feet, grabbing the nearest thing, a broken tree branch. I swung. I didn't have time to think, just react. The branch connected with something hard, something thick. It staggered back just enough for me to get a look, and there it was, the thing that hit me. It wasn't human, though it stood upright. It was massive, hunched like a gorilla, but far taller, at least 7 feet, maybe more. Its body was twisted, like someone had mixed human with, I don't even know. It had thick, gnarled arms that reminded me of tree limbs, and its skin, or fur, or whatever it was dark and rough. Its face, though, that's where it got me. The face was flat, almost like a bear's snout, but wider. A mockery of a man. A man-bear, if you can even imagine such a thing. It didn't have claws like you'd expect. No, its hands were large, calloused, but disturbingly human, and it grabbed at me with a strength that made me feel like a rag doll. I swung again with the branch, knowing full well it was useless. The creature, it wasn't angry, it wasn't wild. It was like it knew exactly what it was doing. It grabbed me again, lifting me clear off the ground, and I swear at that moment, I thought I was dead. This thing had no hesitation. I could see it calculating, like it was deciding the most efficient way to kill me. I must have blacked out, because the next thing I knew, I was back on the forest floor, my body covered in cold mud. The creature was gone. But Mike Renfro wasn't the last body I found. When the sun came up and backup finally arrived, they found me half-dragged toward another wreck deep in the forest. They didn't believe me at first. Hell, why would they? A small-town cop ranting about monsters tearing apart people? But the bodies spoke louder than I could. 3 more locals, shredded beyond recognition, all in the same area. It took them weeks to clear the wreckage and the bodies. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't just hunting. It was smart. I'd say methodical. The case got closed. Officially, it was ruled an accident. Some nonsense about wild animals, but no one dared to look too close. You know how it is with the higher-ups. They don't want that kind of mess on their hands. As for me, well, I'm still a small town cop. Nothing ever really came of that night. No investigations, no documentaries, and that's fine by me. What happened, happened, and I'm damn sure it's still out there. Not that it matters. At least, not anymore. If you're still here, I hope tonight's story helped you drift off, or at least kept you wondering. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And if you're already asleep, well, sweet dreams. This was Sleep Crime Stories. See you in the next case.